All right, welcome back to another episode of Asset Coach and Tax Strategist. And if you're a subscriber, thanks so much for subscribing. If you're not, feel free to hit that bell, subscribe. We drop episodes every Thursday. If you like our content, give us a thumbs up. Also, add some comments. Let us know if we're on the right track here. If there's any questions or things topics that you'd like to us to discuss. And really remember, the Asset Coach Tax Strategist YouTube channel. This content is really surrounded my book, Economic Termites and Farming Assets. Basically, what is eating away at our wealth? What are the decisions being made? So a quick summary: economic termites, taxes, inflation, time, laws and regulations. There's other smaller termites, but the biggest one is laws and regulations, our politicians. And so today's episode, and probably a series, there's a lot of content to go over. This may be the first part of, I don't know how many other episodes, but I'm just going to dive into this and just do what I need to do. There's just been a lot going on in this current administration. What they've done thus far this year, it's quite honestly remarkable. But also, we sit here and it's a bit confounding of what the heck's going on. It almost feels like chaos and disorganization. And this is the interesting thing about Trump and his ability to really focus on what his plan is. What is the deal that's going on? So we're gonna dive into this. I have no idea what my team's gonna call this episode, so whatever it's called, welcome. But got a ton of stuff here. Really, what ended up happening is that there's a lot of stuff that I hear from the various guys that I watch on YouTube. And just some of the information, people that I've found over the last few years that I felt was good content, not fear mongering, not some of the channels where you go look at 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and they're saying the same thing today, but just different words. And so I really wanted to, like all we always do here, is try to read between the lines, kind of figure out, get to the truth of what's going on, but not create this conspiracy theory, black helicopter kind of environment either. I've been very clear on China. I've been very clear on California. And my clarity on China is really unfolding more and more as we start seeing things occur in this current administration. And we'll talk about some of that. But the reality is, let's just kind of get into this and talk about kind of what we'll talk about. There's something coming out here fairly soon called the Mar-a-Lago Accords. And this is really the next step, so to speak, in I guess the next step in our country, the future of our country. The reality is, we've talked about BRICS, right? The de-dollarization. We've talked about China. All those things go together. We've talked about cryptocurrency, goes together. So there are multiple layers to this strategy that's going on. So it's kind of like, I guess one of the things is that if you don't understand kind of your body, right? If you don't understand your body, you go start working out, you start eating better, you start feeling better, and then as you're feeling better, you're eating better, you're maybe taking some supplements or doing a little bit of exercise, and you see some of the pounds fall off if you're looking to drop off some pounds. But then also you start seeing some definition in areas that, because you're working out and you're focusing physically on your workout, what this looks like, and you're just feeling more and more better, more and more better. You're feeling better. And what's that exude? It's you start exuding confidence, and you start, your shoulders a little bit up, your head's a little bit up, and you're feeling good, right? And you want to continue to that feeling. Now, imagine if you're a bodybuilder. I don't know if you've ever seen bodybuilding competitions. All of a sudden you see these guys and these gals, and you're like, there's no way that's a muscle, right? That was an implant. My body doesn't have that muscle, right? I mean, every single muscle in the body is not just defined, but exploded, right? I mean, they're just like huge. And so, but if a bodybuilder were to get into a fight or go into some kind of jogging or exercise or things that would need more nimbility, that's just a word I made up. They need to be nimble. They need to be able to move smoothly from one direction to another, right? Probably wouldn't happen. But now imagine a ninja, right? sleek, silent, right? They're able to get in places, they're agile, they can jump, land, roll, right? They can do all these different things, but they don't have the muscles a bodybuilder does, right? Now, imagine you're somebody with an IQ of 200 and you may not have the physical physique, but you have the brain muscle that's like a bodybuilder's muscle. Okay. Now imagine all three of those in one. You've got the strength, you got the agility, and you've got the smarts and the intelligence. What would that be? That's basically what this administration is trying to put together to save the United States, to continue for the United States to be the world power moving forward in the next 200 years. Okay. Does that sound extreme or what? But it is. Think about it. Think about it. All the noise and all the things that we've heard, all the frustration we felt last 4 years, just even in Trump's first administration, how frustrating that was, and the divide in the country, and really, as we know, most people who aren't supporters of Trump, they're not supporters of him. They're not even listening to what he's saying, or more importantly, what he's trying to do. They just hate him. And so I think this is actually quite brilliant on his side, because I believe that what he is doing is trying to keep the focus on himself. And this happens sometimes in sports. Sometimes what coaches will do to keep the stress and the anxiety and the focus in a big game, especially if it's like the Olympics or the World Series or some kind of championship game, sometimes a coach will do or say certain things that the media is now focused on them and not the players. And that's allow the players to just be like, oh, okay, all right, let's just be players. Let's go into the game and let's be who we are, right? I believe that's what Trump is doing right now. So if you've ever read his book, The Art of the Deal, basically it's the focus of negotiation. 100% about negotiation. And that is what Trump is doing. Trump is using every single tool in the toolbox in this negotiation process. So that's my teaser. So we're going to talk about that. But before we talk about that, we've got to look at really what has been the evolution of our country. What has been the evolution of where we're sitting at here today? It's pretty crazy. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm an expert. I've never said I'm an expert. This is one guy's opinion, trying to look at everything and trying to see how's this fit in my world, and maybe I should share it on my YouTube channel with some of my members, some clients that are focused on, oh my goodness, what do I do in my life? Rather than hearing all this stuff, put money into the market, go buy real estate, go do this, right? Everything is just very monolithic and mono-focused on one little thing. But it's broader than that. And that's how the wealthy get wealthier. The tax code is broader than that. You want to save money on taxes, just follow the tax code. They tell you what to do. And there's three most efficient assets. Go look at my previous YouTube episodes on the 3Ds in the asset buddy system. We talk about that. Talk about the financial distributors. Go check out those episodes. Okay? And hit like on those too, by the way. So what has been the history and the evolution of where we're at today? So it starts back in 1913. Okay, so if we could put on jump into our time machine and we muddled to 1913, what happened? The Federal Reserve was created. Now, the Federal Reserve is not a federal organization. It is a separate entity. It is supposed to be a separate entity. And if you look at the history of the Federal Reserve, and if you look at central banks and what our country tried to do to create central banks and all this kind of stuff, it was one failure after another to where now all of a sudden we have the Federal Reserve. Now we can make the argument, and there's some people who've made this argument very, very effectively, that the Federal Reserve is part of the problem. But it also is part of the solution. So how can you have two sides of this coin be good? And it's really based on what we're trying to do economics. So let's take even a step further and let's go to kingdoms, right? We have a king and queen, we have a kingdom, and we have people that look, the king rules the roost, right? And everybody in the kingdom works together and, in fact, protects together the kingdom. From what? Other kingdoms. Why? What did other kingdoms want? Land, power, riches. Does that sound any different from today? No. What are the core things we need to survive? Food, water, resources. Has that changed from then to now? No. So we're still playing this game, but now we are a IQ of 200, agility of a ninja, and strength of a bodybuilder. Right? We've evolved. We have technology. I mean, think about the weapons back then were a sword made out of steel, and they were still trying to figure out how to perfect the steel. That a shield. Sometimes it was wood or even out of metal, right, of some sort. Then they had catapults and they had spears, right? They had all these different tools. But now what do we have? We've got satellites in space, right? We've got radar, we've got stealth, we've got smart bombs, we've got drones, we have night vision. I mean, think about all the stuff we have today. So it's literally night and day now. But that's the evolution. But we're all still playing the same game. And you and I, as Americans, we have all those things. We have the resources. Okay, we're trying to protect our resources. And the development of the Federal Reserve was one of those things that was the first part of that. Our country evolved. And as we evolved, we knew we need to figure out a system to allow us to continue to evolve. Or we would still be sitting in horse and buggies, bartering my wheat with your corn and your milk and those eggs. That's where we would be at today. And that's where some countries are at today. Still. Right? So, but we in the United States are not there. We are a republic of people from all over the world who have come together here. Sure, there were already people here. That's a different dialogue and conversation. But the same was true everywhere else. Every land gets conquered. It's the same game. We're all playing the game of Risk. Okay? But now, we're not only playing the game of Risk, but we're playing the game of Monopoly. We're building houses, and we're going to take our greenhouses and turn it into a red hotel. Okay? And so that's the economics of it. And this is what our republic allows as a free capitalistic market. It allows the market, allows you and I, we the people, to evolve this system. And with this evolution of the system, we still have those outside forces that our government is trying to protect. And sometimes our government is actually allowing the wolf into the hen house. Right? And then we're like, whoa, 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 hang on, no, get this out, right? Because there's damage. And then we got to recover and recoup. And then from 1913 Federal Reserve, we go to 1944, World War II. And we have the Bretton Woods. And what was this? This was really where we got together and we flexed our muscles. We flexed our muscles and said, y'all effed up. We, greatest generation, they weren't called that yet, right? Came in and we supported. And think about this. Before Japan attacked us in Pearl Harbor, we were not going to get into this war, the European theater. We were not going to get into this war. Now, we were helping our allies and supply them. We were supplying England. We were supplying France. We were supplying with goods and services. We as a country stopped manufacturing vehicles and we started manufacturing weapons and different things, to supplies to help. Absolutely. Then Japan, right? And go read your history books about the rest of that. But Bretton Woods was where we got the world leaders together and we said, you know what? Out of this chaos, rises the phoenix. Out of these ashes rises the phoenix, right? And here comes the phoenix is no longer a phoenix, it's the American eagle. We're soaring freely over the land, and we're saying the US dollar is going to be the world currency. Everything is going to be pegged to this US dollar that uses gold reserves as the backing of this dollar. Okay? And why? Why did this happen? Because we wanted to be the 800-pound gorilla? No, because this was our opportunity to transition the world into a global economy. At the time, they called it international trade. So now we're at this global economy, right? And so now what happens? Well, we have to have a singular currency that everything gets pegged to, because then how do you know that the pound value compared to what? How do you know what the yen value compared to what? Right? So if you had a baseline, everything can be pegged off the baseline. It's kind of like a like an axle, or your tire on your bike. You have that axle and all the spokes, right? They all go out. So all the world currencies had their separate currencies, but it's all pegged to this axle, the centerpiece. Okay, this was the US dollar. And if your economics weren't very good, then you had to come to the world and say, okay, we want to do international trade, and we think we have some stuff, that resources that could be beneficial, and we'd like to trade. And that's where all these different trade agreements came into place. Okay? And we saw a lot of success, a lot of growth. Okay? In America, manufacturing was like going crazy, right? There was so much growth. And then, of course, we had the Korean War, right? And then we went into, and we ended up going Vietnam. Why? Because same thing, goes back to the same thing I was talking about. Land, greed, resources, right? So you had this communism because of Russia, right? So you had North Korea, you had Vietnam, and communism was trying to spread and expand, as well as the Republic of Freedom capitalists, right? But remember, all these other European countries, all these other countries weren't a democratic republic like the United States. They had kings, they had rulers, they had monarchs, they had parliaments. And all these other countries were working hard to try to evolve into something that worked with what we were doing in America. Why? Because we were the one that just came in. We were the badasses that just came in and rescued the world. And then we said, let's start international trade. Who were our two allies, our greatest allies after all of this? The two countries that we helped defeat, Japan and Germany. Okay? So if we wanted to conquer the world, we would have. It would have been done. This would not be the United States of America. This would be the United Countries of Earth. But that's not been our goal. Even those that sit there, and those Karens that complain and yell and scream and all this kind of stuff that we're horrible, yeah, we're not perfect, nor is anybody. But at the end of the day, we also did not do what we could have done at every point in history since World War II. We could have, but we didn't. Okay? Then what happened? 1971. We saw with inflation, we saw with the having the dollar pegged to the gold reserve, it was actually limiting growth. But with that comes inflation, or deflation, or stagflation. So we have these other various things that pop into place. And so in 1971, Nixon says, we are no longer backing the dollar on the gold reserves. And what do we have to do? Freaking figure this out. right? And this is where the Federal Reserve stepped in even more and now is controlling interest rates, liquidity. That's what the Federal Reserve's job is, control liquidity. They do it two ways: interest rates or printing money. That's it. That's it. Makes it difficult. And then all of a sudden, does gold like devalue? No, we've still as citizens and the country and other countries still use gold as a reserve. But here's the interesting thing is gold isn't finite. Gold is a resource that the earth provides us. And even today, even within the last few months, in 2025, at the time of this recording, there has been trillions of dollars of gold reserves uncovered in the earth in various countries, whether it's Argentina, China, a huge resources found in Oregon for lithium. I mean, all over. Why? Because God provides. God provides. This is what the earth is. That's what these metals do. The earth creates this stuff, these resources for us. And as a bodybuilding ninja with an IQ of 200, we look at this stuff and go, holy cow, we can make this. And it will do that. And then we test it out and we're like, oh, that sucked. But oh my goodness, it's so cool. It can do that now. What if we did that? And that is what the value of being a free capitalist allows us to be. But then over a period of time from 71 to 1985, we started seeing more and more issues. Okay? Remember, this is a international global market. And what happened was as our dollar gets stronger, it makes it difficult for our trade partners to make money. Okay. And so if we wanted to really just kind of screw the world, so we decided not to conquer the world, but if we really wanted to screw the world, we could have just continued to allow the strength of our dollar to go up. And we just take stuff at that point because then everything's a third world country. But we didn't. So in 1985, there was something called the Plaza Accord. And what this was a devaluation of the US dollar by about 25%. Literally a purposeful, focused decision to take our dollar and devalue it by 25%. But what did Reagan do in this period of time? He cut taxes. Remember, taxes were for most Americans were very, very overbearing. Why? Because when we went to the left the gold as a reserve, went to interest rates. Would we have the end of the 70s, early 80s? We had high inflation, right? We were trying to figure this crap out, and we figured it out. And in this period of time, the financial distributors, the banks, investment companies, insurance companies create product and try to follow through with this kind of what's going on with the economics. Okay. And so as we all of a sudden hit to 1985, Reagan changes taxes, brings it all the way down from 70% to 50%. Okay. But what happened? We also devalued our dollar by 25%. Okay. Now that's the history. And these moments in time are economic situations for the valuation of you and I to be able to have some form of currency, of trade, of value. Okay. This is so important to understand. And now I'm not making all this stuff up. This is stuff that happened. And like I said, I am not the guy who's smart enough to figure all this out. I watch a bunch of YouTube guys that are awesome. And I'm just giving you the Cliff Notes versions. These dudes kick you know what. But now we go into the Mar-a-Lago Accords. Okay? And we start going through this process and this cycle. Okay? And we start looking at this And we had a couple different waves. Okay, there's these cycles that one of the guys I watch, he talks about these cycles. Every 50 years, there's a technological cycle, basically what he calls quantum waves. Okay. Every 80 years, there's a financial. So the last time was 1944, and now what are we doing today? Right. So, and then every 200 years, there's a political revolution. Okay. So that's kind of this cycle. Now, is it to the year? Of course not. These are generalizations, right? But it's important to understand these cycles as we go through this. So let's talk about Bretton Woods first. Bretton Woods, 1944. What was its point? What was its purpose? It established a fixed exchange rate that was pegged to the U.S. dollar. Okay, because we use gold as a backing, right? The goal was to what? Promote a global economy. Okay. Then when we got to the Plaza Accord in 1985, so right, we in 71, Nixon said, "Hey, we're not going to use this gold reserve, right? What was the whole point of Bretton Woods? We're going to fix the exchange of the dollar pegged to gold." And then in 71, Nixon's like, just kidding, we can't do that anymore, right? And then we saw evidence of that shaping out year over year, and still as this global economy that was developing and evolving. And so in 1985, we had this Plaza Accord. This Plaza Accord had the G5, the five largest nations. They agreed to depreciate the US dollar to address trade imbalance. Does that sound familiar to today? Okay. Does that sound familiar today? It should, right? It should, because when we look at 40 years later today, so 1985 to 2025, 40 years later, what are we talking about? An imbalance of trade. Okay. This led to significant appreciation of the Japanese yen and the German Deutschmark. So what did we do? We devalued our dollar and propped up the yen and the Deutschmark. Who were our big allies? Japanese and Germans. Those were our big trading partners, right? China was still a third world country. They're still picking their nose trying to figure out what to do. That's the history of where we're at right now.